Right. What are some of the best practices that you see in high performing testing teams that are working in agile environments?
So you're going to ask somebody who self-identifies with the context-driven testing
Right.
community what the best practices are. I'll give you so I'll reframe that in my terms, which is I'll give you some heuristics for what I look for at high-performing teams in testing. Um, you, uh, so what I look for is there's leadership in the testing group that has business alignment. And what I mean by that is, and I when I manage test teams, I ask this question a lot. Do you understand the context in your business for what we're testing? Could you identify problems that you're finding and how they relate to the real world? Can you tell us when you find a problem or an issue what that would have resulted in if that would have gotten out to our product community or our users?
So, who are some of the thought leaders out there that you recommend people follow?
So I like I'm again being in the context driven world. I'm a big fan of James Bach, Michael Bolton, Paul Holland. I believe the rapid software testing methodology is a great underpinning for any solid software testing model. It's hard because I'm friends with a lot of these folks as well, but I would say, people that are outside of my expertise, when it comes to performance testing, Mark Tomlinson is probably the best in the business, and I've had a couple calls with him and some clients of mine, and very rarely, at risk of embarrassing him if he listens to this, very rarely do you meet folks who walk the talk as well as somebody as Mark does. I mean, he has been in some very high profile, big performance testing gigs and just literally blows people away when you get into the guts. He can get into the weeds and he can talk at the highest level as well. So, Mark Tomlinson is somebody who I'm a fan of. Um, Outside of the testing community, or do you want me to talk about testing folks? Because I think there's other people that testers should talk about that aren't just software testers.
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I like an author named Scott Birkin. He wrote a book called The Myths of Innovation, and it's really about how hard work can help you overcome, innovation problems. That the mythology that creative people or creative solve, they're just that way. You know what I mean? And that there's not a lot of hard work and trial and error behind that. And I hope that inspires me quite a bit. Another great reference for folks who's written some fantastic books that really parallel what we're trying to do in the context-driven testing community, but also the larger software testing world could take a lot from is Harry Collins. He wrote a book, Tacit and Explicit Knowledge, which a lot of the work that Michael and James have done over the last 4 to 5 years in terms of the testing and checking paradigm and checking being part of testing and how all that fits together is based on a lot of conversations they've actually had with Harry himself. He also wrote a great book called Interactional Expertise, which is about how expertise fits on a continuum from kind of the Cliff Clavin beer mat knowledge to you're actually contributing to the science of, and that interactional expertise is, to paraphrase, expertise in the language of a discipline without having the expertise of being a practitioner. And I think that's a tremendous skill and something that test managers should definitely be able to develop. Where you are somebody who can speak to equity traders. You're somebody who can talk to claims adjusters and insurance in the way that they speak without actually maybe having your Series 7 or being a sales trader, or but be able to help them think about what they're doing differently without being a practitioner. So
Right. Great. So you talked before about software tools and not just falling in love with a software tool when and to talk a little bit about how teams should look at tools in the context of the work they're doing and when to when's the right time to evaluate a tool? How do you evaluate a tool, and how do you eventually start using some of the new tools that are out there?
I think the first thing you should do, just continually, but particularly when you're looking at a tool, is asking the five whys, right? Get to why do we want to do this? Why are we doing this? What problem are we trying to solve? And let that drive your strategy. Far too often, there's a kind of whiz-bangy, new things that, somebody's going to sell you a, newfangled defect predictinator, and that's going to somehow solve all your problems. When, another great author who I failed to mention, who is Jerry Weinberg, right? And he wrote a whole series of books about software quality management, but also wrote a fantastic book that I think everybody should read just in general. It's called Secrets of Consulting. And he talks about, no matter what anybody tells you, there's always a problem, right? I'm paraphrasing, right? And that problem is always people. And we let tools too frequently become a method for trying to fix our people problem, which they will not do. So I think the organizational problems are by and large people problems. So when we understand what that is, let that drive our tool strategy. And again, tools are, particularly in the testing world, an extension of the tester. They should be extending the tester's reach, as Michael Bolton likes to say. So there's certain blocking and tackling things in terms of software testing that I think, particularly in the enterprise world, people are expecting to see around, test management, defect management, and I think there's some great things, and that's why I'm a big fan of the QASymphony tool set, is that I think they bring us along quite a ways from what the old, tired, bog standard, tool set that's been out there forever don't do. And I think there's too much sunken cost bias in why those tools don't change as frequently, because every time I turn people on to new things, they typically go, oh, wow, well, okay, well, let's do it that way. But letting the information drive your strategy is the first thing you should do. Then I think, particularly in tool selection, so much of, depending on what you're getting, but if it's a third-party world, so much is built around the organization that's building the tool. And I really look at organizations that have a similar ethos and have a similar support structure and are aligned. This is probably going to sound funny, but are aligned with my organization and how we view the software testing world. So finding folks that, because you know what it's like. This is your world, right? So you buy a tool. Well, it's like getting married. You know what I mean? You didn't just get married and then that's the end of it. No, you married into a family and all that comes with it, right? So aligning yourself to organizations that have the same kind of ethics and principles as you do, and how to conduct themselves as a business is super important. I know I'm not answering any kind of it needs to be this technical set and you need to, because I think that stuff changes so frequently, and technology goes like this really, really quick, but it doesn't go like this very quick, So there's lots of noise and not a lot of signal around this. So finding people who are aligned with you is super important, because I've been burned. I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars over my 20 years in testing, probably more than that, on tools that ultimately, why we didn't get where we wanted to go? Because the organizations weren't aligned.
Right. So tell me, in your view, what's next in software testing? What are the big trends that are going to drive us into the future?
Well, I think there's a certain amount of, we've just got over some, I look at, career trajectories and everything else is kind of like, you go like your, 26,000 feet, and then you hit the Hillary step, and then you got another 1,000 feet of drudgery in front of you, right? So I think we've had a few with some new tools coming out, the really embracing in the enterprise world, which I think drives a lot of the macro strategies in technology of open source and cloud-based technology, which really hasn't had huge adoption in the enterprise world, you look at it, it's probably by a factor of 3 the amount of technology jobs in the enterprise world as opposed to the tech jobs, right? So there's I think there's only like 28,000 people, or if it's even that work at Google. It's just not a large organization. Someone's gonna fact check me on that, I'm sure. But there's just not a lot of people. So the large financial services, they drive a lot of that strategy. So I think some of those big trends are just still, realizing their usefulness in an enterprise context. It's interesting, to see as well. We've big data, which was super buzzwordy and big and everything, and now people are talking like, well, was that really even the right thing we were trying to solve? And it's kind of dropped off the radar screen, except at some small industry conferences. So, there's obviously still a lot of issues to be solved with big data, but not even a year ago, that was the big thing everybody was talking about. So I think we're a little bit flat for a while. I really do. I think people are looking at now, which I kind of laugh a little bit when I hear about agile at scale. And, I talk to a lot of organizations that are trying to scale not only agile at the enterprise level, but also like across, multiple time zones and locations, which is extremely difficult. And to me, my understanding runs very counterintuitive to a lot of the agile practices that are widely accepted in the industry. So I think this idea of all testing in an agile context is development driven. I think that's going to change as well, and I gave a talk last year with QASymphony as well about my predictions for last year. I'm going to do another one this year and see how many they came true over the year. But I think the idea of a kind of combination, people who are articulate in the business and maybe Scrum and all the other ritualistic things that happen in the agile world, that role is going to become incredibly important. We've seen that in our business, that people want kind of the rise of the test manager, not an operational test manager, not a manager of managers, not as I like to call them at UBS, the coloring in boys, who just fill out spreadsheets, but people who can help provide clear information and unbiased and objective information to decision makers in the context of being a test manager. I still see that's going to rise and probably be on the prominence. So people who can help make those decisions and who can, all this stuff we've got, distill it down to highly concentrated pieces of information. I think that's going to be a big trend. If you look at the last tester meetup in New York, James Bach just spoke at. He was out in the Bronx with me afterwards, and he was like, "What is going on?" He's like, "There are so many test managers and folks in the meetup to talk about rapid software testing," and I think that's driving it. Is people have all this stuff and they don't know what to do with it, and so I'm bullish on being a test manager. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at a couple talks I'm giving this year, what I think a test manager is. But that's I think where we're at.
Great. Well, Keith, thanks for your time today. This has been great stuff, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you very much.